Welcome to PeopleTools Tech Tips. I'm Randall Groncki. Today we're going to talk about date math in PSQuery. If you're watching this right now, chances are that you're trying to create some kind of date-related expression in PSQuery and it's not working. If you're in a hurry, jump ahead to the specific section you need here or in the comments below. If you're still with me, welcome. I know dates in PSQuery can be frustrating. I hope this gives you what you need, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to help. PeopleSoft is an ERP system driven by dates. You and your customers see these dates in the PSQuery output and ask questions like, how many days between these dates? How long ago was that date? Does that date fall within a specific window? And you need to put the answers to those questions in your PSQuery. You may have copied and pasted a perfectly good expression from a SQL tool into PSQuery and then watched that expression fail. That same expression works in SQL. Why doesn't it work in PSQuery? The reason those perfectly good SQL expressions fail in PSQuery is because PSQuery converts all dates into character strings before you can act upon them with your expressions. To you, the smart human, you see two dates in the output. You should be able to subtract one from the other and get the difference. Basic SQL. But since PSQuery has already converted these dates to character strings, you might as well try subtracting lollipops from oak trees and expect to get a reasonable number for the difference. But wait, all is not lost. PeopleSoft provides us with Meta-SQL elements to which enable us to easily manipulate dates and other structures in PSQuery. Meta-SQL are platform-independent functions that expand at runtime to platform-specific syntax. A valid Meta-SQL expression should work the same in DB2, SQL Server, and Oracle, despite the actual SQL is different between these databases. In the blog and in the notes below, I've included a link to PeopleBook's Meta-SQL documentation for PeopleBooks 860. Find the one correct for your current PeopleTools version if it's not 860. I'm just going to demonstrate the Meta-SQL for PSQuery date work in this video, but there are many other functions. Give it a quick scan. It's good to be aware of what's available before you go reinventing a wheel. For our demonstration, I'm using a simple query on an HCM's job table. We're retrieving just a few fields from the current row. Let's start with today and now. The Meta-SQL function for today is the current date is %CurrentDateIn. Add an expression. Expression type is date. Expression text is %CurrentDateIn. Click OK, and then click the Use as Field link. The expression is our last field. Run the query, and we see the last column of the query is today's date. If you need something more exact than just today, you may need to find the date time value for right now. The Meta-SQL function for now is %CurrentDateTimeIn. Select the Expressions tab and add an expression. Expression type is DateTime. Expression text is %CurrentDateTimeIn. Click OK and then click the Use as Field link. Run the query and we see the last column of the query is the current date and time we ran the query. Now that we can express today and now, how do we use date fields from the tables when we know they've been converted to character strings? Meta-SQL provides wrappers for date fields to force PSQuery to use these fields as dates. Instead of overriding the character conversions, %DateIn Meta-SQL function reconverts the value back to the original date value. Before we can use other Meta-SQL functions like %DateDiff and DateAdd, we need to put these dates in our wrappers. Let's see how that works. Add an expression. Expression type is date. Expression text is %DateIn. Choose the effective date field, close parenthesis, click Use as Field link, run the query. We see the last column with our Meta-SQL appears the same as the effective date column. The difference is that the PSQuery considers this a date now, not a character string. Now let's use the %DateTimeIn wrapper for, you guessed it, a date time fields. Add an expression, change the expression type to date time. Expression text is %DateTimeIn. Add the field last update date time, close the parenthesis. Click the Use as Field link, run the query, Now we can see our last column is the date time value of the last update time field. Click on the SQL tab and we see all the work PSQuery is doing to convert that date time to a character string and then back to a date time field. Now that we know how to tell PSQuery to use these date fields as actual dates, we can use other MetaSQL functions to manipulate those dates. The %DateDiff MetaSQL function returns the number of days between two dates. This function returns a number value, not a date value. Looking at our query fields, we can ask how many days are there between the person's last hire date and the effective date. To get the number of days between the dates, first we have to wrap the dates, then we put them into a DateDiff MetaSQL function. Click on the Expressions tab and add an expression. Change the expression type to number and change the length to 6 to allow for a lot of days between those dates. %DateDiff, then the first date on the timeline. Put in the %DateIn wrapper and add the field and find the last hire date field, comma, the %DateIn wrapper for a second date, add a field, select the effective date field, and then close out the parenthesis. So the expression is %DateDiff of these two dates, each of the dates in a date wrapper. Click the Uses field link, run the query. In the last column, we have the number of days between the last start date and the effective date. Now, just so you know, in the Oracle SQL world, we can write this a different way. In the expression text, just have %DateIn effective date minus %DateIn last hire date. Run that and we see the same number in the expression done the two different ways. This probably won't work the same in DB2 or SQL Server. Another common functionality is to calculate a date that is a number of days before or after a given date. What is 6 months before the effective date? The way we do that is with the %DateAdd MetaSQL function. Let's see an example of that. Go to the Expressions tab, add an expression. Expression type will be a date. The expression is %DateAdd, add our date wrapper, %DateIn, and add the effective date field, comma, and then the number of days we want to add to this date. 6 months is about 183 days. Close this function and click OK, use this field, and run the query. Here's our effective date, 1/1/2011. In the last column, we have 6 months later at 7/3/2011. And we see that calculated every row in our query. The %DateAdd function also works to subtract days from a date. Let's remove that field from the query. What if we wanted 6 months before the effective date? Edit the expression. This function adds days, so change our number to a negative number so it will subtract 183 days by adding -183. Use this field, run the query. Now the value of our function is 6 months before our effective date. Our last date function is converting a date time field into just a date. There will be times when you want to do date math with two different types of fields. What we have to do is convert that date time field to a date field first using the %DatePart function. The date math works only on fields of the same type. We can't find the difference between a date time and a date. Putting a date time field into a DateIn wrapper will cause a PSQuery to error. The wrappers are not interchangeable. Here's a common question. How long ago was this record updated? We have our last update time field and we have our current date. The formula is current date minus last update time. The %DatePart returns the date value portion of the date time field. Let's go to the Expressions tab and add a new expression. The result will be a number as in the number of days. Let's build this piece by piece. Add the last update time field. First thing we have to do is put it in a date time wrapper. Now we have a date time field we can work with. To convert that to a date, we need to wrap that in a %DatePart function. Now it's returning our date. %DateDiff for the difference between the two dates. The last update time function is the first date on the timeline, and %CurrentDateIn is the date on the timeline. Change the number length to the expression to 6, use as a field, and run the query. Here's our query showing us the number of days between the last update time field and today. The last thing to cover before we wrap up is using these expressions in the where clause. We want to know what effective dated rows we have in the past year. We do that in the criteria section and put the Meta-SQL there. Add to criteria, the field is effective date, is greater than, expression, %DateAdd, %CurrentDateIn, minus 365 will give us a year ago. Let's run it. These are all the rows that have effective dates within the past year. Now you're an expert on date math and date manipulation in PSQuery. Not so hard now that we know how PSQuery handles the dates. Thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing to our channel, and we'll see you next time here on PeopleTools Tech Tips.